I live in a building now where the majority of the residents go to meetings, but when I was on boards at different buildings, I would say like maybe 4 or 5 people go. So the board and the people determine what can happen in a building. But if nobody's going to the meetings, it's just the board that determines. And you get a few bad, people that don't know what they're doing, they can literally ruin the board. Who sets the budget? The board does. The board sets a budget. So if you get a board member who's got a wife that's an interior designer and doesn't like the hallways, wants to remodel them, and nobody's going to meetings, and he's got control of the other board members, guess what? You're having a special assessment to redo the hallways even though you like them. This is LARICY Live, and I'm your host, Matt LARICY, giving you unfiltered access to the world of real estate. We cover market trends, news, and give you the honest answers that will keep you ahead of the real estate game. LARICY Live is brought to you by Zenlist. Do you want to know the secret to growing a high-volume real estate business? It's not just about generating the most leads. The key to success for LARICY's agents is providing the best client experience. We put our clients on Zenlist because we know that they're getting the modern, mobile experience they not only want, but expect from their agent in this day and age. Using Zenlist with our clients put us all together in a shared space where we could work together during the home search process, which helps us be efficient and provides our clients the VIP treatment. Sign up for Zenlist using code LARICYLIVE, no spaces, all lowercase, to save $240 on your first year's subscription. LARICY Live is also brought to you by Lincoln Title. Lincoln Title is the best and most efficient title company in Chicago and the best place to close your property. Okay, so today we are discussing everything you need to know about high rises. What's it like to live in one? What's it like to buy in one? Everything you want to know about it. We get these questions all the time, so we figured we'd take them all and just put them into one spot. So, what is the definition of a high rise? Technically, a high rise is anything above 7 stories. That's what it's classified on the MLS. So we will go with that anything above 7 stories would be classified as a high rise. Generally speaking, it depends on the size of the building. I would say $2,000 to $3,000 a unit would be considered pretty good. The reality is, even if you have $2,000 to $3,000 a unit, if there's a big project, you're going to have a special assessment. So, you have to look at each reserves on a relative basis. What is a special assessment? A special assessment is essentially a one-time fee to pay for a big capital expenditure. So imagine like if you need to redo the hallways and you don't have enough money in your reserves, you would have to come out of pocket. So it would be a one-time additional fee to pay for a big project in a building. How bad is special assessments? I tell people, listen, a lot of people think special assessments are horrible, terrible things. At some point, everything is going to break and everything's going to have to be replaced. If you have a special every 7 to 10 years, it's not the end of the world. You have a special every other year, then that means that the building's usually not well ran. What is a typical move-in fee? So when you buy in high rises, you have move-in fees. You have move-in fees and you have move-out fees. And lower end, lower price point buildings will be about $250 to $350 for a non-refundable deposit and about a $500 refundable deposit. In a high-end building, it could be as high as $1,000 for a move-in fee and a $1,000 refundable fee. Generally speaking, the nicer the building, the higher the fees will be. It's twofold. One, it's a nicer building. It's an easy way to build up the reserves. And honestly, most people don't bat an eye about it. And two, it helps deter renters. So if they don't have a rent cap in place, if they have a higher move-in fee, it will make the building not as attractive to investors because every time you have a turnover, you have to pay that fee. Is there pet fees? So yeah, this is the other thing to get to know, guys, that in big buildings, you're going to have a lot of different fees that are going to be involved. There will always be some sort of dog fee. They usually don't have a big cat fee, but usually there's a dog fee. And that's just because dogs, they do have wear on a building. There's hair that goes in the hallways, so you have to vacuum. The accidents happen. They can have a little mud on their paws and things of that nature. It's usually relatively cheap, about $100 a year or something like that. So it's not like a huge fee, but there is usually some sort of fees for it. Do you have to use a service elevator when you have a dog? Typically, if there is a service elevator, you generally have to use that when you take out dogs. I know this makes a lot of people very upset. We've lost deals over people having to use service dogs. But I tell people is that, like, listen, at the end of the day, not everybody likes dogs. Now, I like dogs. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it if you don't or do like dogs. But some people are afraid of them, and they don't want to be in the same elevator. Some people don't like big dogs. Some people don't want dog confrontations. So what they do is they limit it to the service elevators unless somebody's doing a move. And at that point, you would be able to use a regular elevator. It is what it is, and it's just part of living in a bigger building. Do all buildings have dog runs? Not typically, but some buildings do have dog runs. And generally speaking, if you do have the dog run, you are supposed to and required to pick up after your pet. That's a big thing people don't know about, is they think that just because there's a dog run in the building, that means that they can just leave the feces just sitting there and that the maintenance will pick it up. That's not the case. You are required to pick up after your dog. Do buildings have dog restrictions? I will say that most buildings will have restrictions against like pit bulls and Rottweilers and more aggressive breed dogs. Some buildings, like older buildings, high rises on like Lakeshore, they tend to have weight limits. A lot of them won't allow dogs above 50 pounds. That's a big one as well. Now, I don't know, as a person that has a Great Dane, I don't know what a Great Dane is going to do that much worse than a small 15-pound dog. But at the end of the day, I'm not saying I support any of these rules, guys. These are just generally speaking what the rules are in buildings. But it is very tough to get an aggressive dog to be passed in a building, even with ESAs. If the building doesn't have a allow dogs, how easy is it to get an ESA? Honestly, I think it used to be easier than it is now. Everybody can go online right now and get an ESA and print it out and present it to a building. And you used to have to accept it. Now buildings are getting a little bit more savvy, knowing that like not a lot of people actually have a medical condition. They're just, they just want the dog, so they just go online and pay the $300 fee. So now some buildings are requiring like actual doctor notes with proof of like how often you've went to the doctor. Now this makes some people very, very upset. And again, guys, I'm not trying to trigger anybody by saying I support this. I'm just saying that these are the rules that people are making up. And in life, we have to follow rules. So if you're trying to buy into a building and these are the rules, you have to respect them. If you don't like the rules, don't buy into the building. It is what it is, I always tell people that this is another thing too, just to back it up, is that like, think of each building like an empire, and there's a ruling governing board that dictates what can and cannot happen in that building. And if you are not a fan of the rules, you either get on the board and fight your way to the top and play the Game of Thrones and become the king and kind of have rulership over that empire, or you just don't buy into it, or you just, conform and live in there. But these are some of the things, and ESAs have been a hot topic lately because a lot of people have been taking advantage of the system. Now, I do believe the system is in place to help people, but, there are people who take advantage, which is why some buildings have been cracking down a little bit more. Are there bike fees? More fees, guys. Yeah, there's generally a small bike fee, anywhere from $25 to $100 a year. Now, this one really makes people mad. It's a trigger some where people are like, this is ridiculous that I have to pay money to store my bike. In all honesty, guys, it's just because, one, you still got to maintain that room, okay? Like somebody's got to go in there and clean it every now and then. And two, it's a way to limit bikes. When bike rooms don't have bike fees, what people do is they get a bike and they throw it in there and they never go in there again. And then next thing you know, there's not enough room for people who actually use their bikes because the bike room's full. What you should do is you should put a bike, and this is just somebody as myself who's been on numerous condo boards, is like, I like to have a fee, nothing crazy. And every quarter we tag the bikes. And if somebody doesn't claim the tag on the bike, and we put out a couple emails and the bike is not claimed, we get rid of the bike. And what this does is this helps reduce the traffic in the bike room and allows people who actually use the bike room to have a bike. I'm telling you, it's a huge problem. I've been in buildings where there's been bikes in there for 5 or 6 years, and people who actually have a bike and use it daily aren't allowed to use it or store it because the bike room's full of bikes that people have never, ever used, or the people who own a bike don't even live there anymore. So it is important. You got to, buying into a high-rise, you have to maintain it. It's a big thing to make sure that the building is well ran. What about storage? What does storage look like? Storage is a hot topic. These are, in high-rises, these are essentially like, cardboard boxes in the sky, right? They're just kind of big glass boxes up there, and you just, you don't have a ton of closets. Usually you could count how many closets are in a place. So additional storage outside of your unit somewhere in the building is big. Now, generally speaking, you get like I call them like oversized dog cages, okay? So think of like a little half box, okay? It's like 9 by 9 by something, 10 maybe, I don't know. Somewhere in that range, but think of an oversized dog cage. Some buildings will have a double cage, okay? So I call them double dog cages, where it's not just the half length, it's the full, floor to ceiling type length of the cage. And then in other buildings, there is an actual room. And this is normally additional cost. And it could be as high, guys, as $50,000. You say, hey, Matt, that is crazy. Somebody pays $50,000 for a 10 by 10 storage room? That sounds nuts. It's like, it does sound nuts to people like ourselves. But, you're spending $5 million and you got a lot of stuff and you want somewhere to store it and you don't want to pay, a few $100s to drive off site every time you need it. And you got something in your building, and for 50 grand, it may not mean anything to them. It is what it is. Generally speaking, those big storage cages big storage rooms are in high net worth buildings, where in reality, there's multiple bids when those things actually hit the marketplace, because there's usually only a few of them in the building. Remember, guys, there's only so much square footage in a building, and there's only so many places that you can have storage. There's a lot of buildings, like I live in a high rise, and we don't have storage outside of the unit. I actually use one of my bedrooms as our storage room. You got to get creative when you live in these type of buildings. And people who are empty nesters, a lot of people that are downsizing, this is the biggest problem they have, because they're like, hey, I want a walk away, carefree type of lifestyle, right? I've been maintaining this big monster house of mine. My kids are gone. I want a place in Chicago. I want a place in Florida. I want somewhere I could park my bag and be done with it. And then they come to like a high rise in Chicago and like, man, where am I going to store all my stuff? And I say, well, listen, the point of you downsize is you try to get rid of all of your stuff. But storage is a huge, big problem for a lot of empty nesters and out-of-towners to want to have additional storage. And you can buy additional storage cages when they come up, or you can rent them. Some buildings don't allow you to sell them, but you can also rent them sometimes. What about parking? How does parking work in high rises? Is it always extra? So most parking in high rises is what we call deeded sold separately. So there's an additional cost, okay? And generally speaking, in the different price points of the building will be the different costs of the parking. So in an entry-level building, the parking is going to be $35,000 extra, okay? So let's use easy math, guys. Let's say it says it's $400,000 for the unit, and it's $35,000 extra for the parking. They will never sell the unit without the parking space, okay? Now, there are some realtors out there be like, oh, they definitely will. No, but almost, I would say 99.9% of the time, they will not sell the unit, the parking on its own. They want to sell it with the unit. So if you see 400 plus 35, think of it like a marketing ploy, and the actual asking price is 435. And it's one loan, one offer, okay? You negotiate off the total package. So 400 plus 35, the total price is 435. So again, generally speaking, parking entry level is 35,000. Now, if it's deeded sold separately, the parking space is a piece of real estate that you own, okay? So there's going to be additional taxes and additional assessments on it, okay? Now, the taxes and assessments are because you own that land, and you got to give the government money back for that land, and you got to give the building money back for assessments to pay for the maintenance of that spot. And again, you say, well, man, I'm just parking my car. What maintenance does it need? Well, you got to power wash that garage a few times a year. There's going to have to be some sort of maintenance in there. Every now and then they got to pave it, so they got to start, saving money for that. They got to clean it. Somebody's got to go out there and just clean it. Just naturally gets really dirty. So there is maintenance that goes into it. So just keep those fees in mind. And I would say that, like, on average for an entry-level building, we're looking at about $500 a year for taxes and about $50 a month for assessments. So these are additional costs. $500 a year for taxes, $50 a month for assessments. In a mid-range to low-end luxury building, parking is going to be $50,000, okay? Now, again, that sounds crazy, but think again, if the prices are more expensive for the unit, the parking is more sought after, okay? So you go $50,000, and then your taxes are anywhere from $750 to $1,000 a year, and you got about $75 a month for assessments. And if it's an upper luxury building, you're looking at anywhere from like 60 to 100,000 for a premium spot. Okay, I know 100 sounds crazy. 100 would be in like an ultra high end building, first floor, like primo parking spot. But generally speaking, we see about 60 to like 78,000 for parking in a high end building. And then your taxes are usually about 12 to 1,400 bucks a year, and your assessments are generally about $100 a month. So these are additional things you have to think about when you're parking. And that's why it's deeded, sold separately. And you can sell the parking to other people in the unit. And most of the time, there's not enough parking spaces for units, okay? And there still is a lot of two-car families. And if you're in an ultra high net worth building, guess what, guys? There's a lot of these rich people who have a lot of exotic cars, Lambos, Ferraris, etc. You can see them when you go into the parking garages. And guess what? If they're spending $350,000 in the car, they won't think twice about spending $75,000 in an extra parking spot that they could leave the car there for when they come in for the summer that's completely protected that they could take out, okay? So, you know, you have to realize that, like, you know, some of these numbers sound crazy, but then again, when you put them in perspective, it doesn't sound that much. It's like, you know, you look at an entry-level parking spot that's $35,000. You know, if you're renting a spot for $250 a month, if you had a mortgage just on $35,000, you do the tax assessments and what you would have on a quote-unquote mortgage for that much, it probably costs you about $175 a month. So you're actually saving money a month. But again, it's a sticker shock for a lot of people. Are all buildings rentable? This is a big one. Not every building is rentable. Some buildings have rental caps. A rental cap or a rental restriction means only a certain number of units can be rented at a time, okay? So if a building is 80-20, okay, so you hear that a lot, like, oh, this is 80%. That means that it's 80% owner occupied and 20% is rented, and only 20% can be rented at any given point. And if you want to be able to rent it out, you'd go on a wait list. So think about going into like the store and a grocery store and you're waiting in line and waiting your turn to rent. How long that could take is a big question. People are like, well, if it's 80-20 and there's 50 units on the wait list, how long could it take? I mean, it could take, 10 years. It could take 6 months. Each building is different. There's no correct answer saying like exactly how long it would take for a rental cap to turn over. Some buildings have rental restrictions or no rental restrictions, meaning that like you can rent at free will, okay? And some people think like, well, if you can rent at free will, does that mean that the building is less valuable because you have more renters? No, it doesn't. I mean, in today's day and age, especially post-COVID, and honestly, post-recession is when it really happened. You have like a time where like people want the flexibility of being able to rent. But no big building in the city, okay, no high rise in the city of Chicago allows Airbnb. And this is a big one. Can I Airbnb my unit in a high rise? The answer is no. I understand that your friend saw one online, okay? People do illegal stuff all the time. People get away with crime, okay? That doesn't mean it's legal. If you're asking me, is there any buildings that I could legally Airbnb or VRBO it in Chicago in a high rise? The answer is absolutely not. We do get a ton of questions on it. We do get a lot of people specifically coming from like the, Florida area or Arizona area where Airbnbs are popular. It is not something that can happen here in Chicago. Are rental caps smart moves? I would say that they're not smart moves. I would say that younger people, generally speaking, under the age of 40, want the flexibility. I would tell you guys right now, if you've never rented a place, most likely you wouldn't rent a place. If you do it for a year, you'll be like, this is too much work. I didn't sign up for this. But people want, you're essentially, by not having a rental cap, you're selling somebody the idea that they could be a landlord. But the minute people actually do it, they don't want to do it. They're like, crap, I regret this. I can't tell you how many of my clients will only look in buildings that don't have rent caps. It's it. It's a deal breaker for them. If there's a rent cap, I won't look at it. Then when they go have the ability to rent, they're like, I don't know, like, I don't really want to do it. Or they'll rent it, and 3 months in, they'll be like, hey, my lease is up in 9 months. Put me down for 6 months from now for us to talk so we can list this thing. I never want to rent again, okay? So, like, again, you're selling somebody the idea of the flexibility, but the reality is they'll probably never do it. What is the difference between an HOA and assessments? So in different parts of the country, people call things HOA dues, and some people call them assessments. So in Chicago, we call them assessments. So HOAs and assessments, that word is interchangeable. It means the same thing. How important is a view on resale? So a big reason why people buy into high rises is they're like, hey, I want a great view, okay? Now, it's not the end-all, be-all, okay? But, we're in Chicago. So if you got a killer lake view or, you got a unit that's facing into a brick wall, of course you're going to be able to get more money for that unit that looks at the lake, okay? Although if you look on a Zestimate or Redfin estimate, they'll compare the two at the same price, okay? But remember, those are just estimates. The reality is a lake view will always give you more money than a looking into a brick wall view. How much does a low floor impact resale? I'll tell you, it's a little difficult to sell a second floor unit in a 100-floor building. Okay, it's just kind of like the point of me wanting to buy into a building is that I want, even I should say, like remotely somewhat of a view, but being on the second floor kind of deters away from high rises. So again, I'm not saying that you can't sell them. I'm saying that in general, in a big high rise, we're talking big high rise. We're not talking like boutique buildings are only like 10 stories. And like a 67 unit building, a second or third floor can be trickier to sell. You just have to price to compensate for that. How do you know if another building will eventually block your view? So this is a big question because a lot of people want to be able to buy into a building solely because of the view. The reality is that if it does have a good view, it's going to up your value. But if you have to kind of predict what's going to happen in the future with land. So there's no way to kind of say like, hey, there's going to be definitely a building here. But, if you're buying into a building with the big lake view and then across the street's a big parking lot, you have to expect that at some point in a big metropolitan city like Chicago, which is the third largest city in the country, that at some point somebody's going to build on that land. Okay. And you just have to say that like, hey, if it happens, great. Like I just have to live with it. Or you just pass on it. Now it could never happen. Okay. It could take 50 years till it happens. But like we can't predict the future of what's going to happen with development. I mean, I'd be surprised if somebody's going to be building high rises in some parts of the city right now due to like what's been happening. But like all we could do is try to tell you, and you can look up zoning maps and see who's like ever pulled permits for it and stuff. But like it's impossible to really say like 100% something would happen. Do all high rises have doorman? Not all high rises have doorman. I would say the majority of them have doormen. Some buildings have eliminated door staff recently to cut down on costs. Although personally, for me, I think one of the main reasons that you'd want to buy into a high rise is for the extra door staff and having like kind of like that. I think that's a big amenity, but not all buildings have doormen. Some buildings have what they call the butterfly system. That's been popular lately. So the butterfly system pitches itself as a virtual doorman. So essentially what that does is that like when you walk up to a building, you just kind of like click who you want to, call to see, and that takes a picture of the person. And then you would get a call from Butterfly on your phone with the picture of that person and the video of them there, and then you can let them in. So it's called a virtual doorman. So Butterfly system is the most popular one right now. Some buildings have switched to it. Again, I personally do prefer a door staff, but not every big building is going to have a door staff. What is the average assessment for a high rise? There is no average. I think it all breaks down to like what amenities you have, how many door staff you have, how many elevators you have, etc. Also, the older the building, the higher the HOA. There is a point where an HOA does increase so much that it actually starts to devalue the building, though. So you kind of have to play that little thing of like, okay, like if I have a $450,000 unit and I have like an $800 a month assessment, that's about right, okay? But if you have a $450,000 unit and your assessments are $2,500, that's going to devalue your unit. Your unit's not going to be that much anymore because somebody who can afford a $450,000 unit can't afford a $2,500 a month assessment. They can afford, you're now like pretty much going for a $750,000 buyer. So again, your assessments could also affect the value of your place. And this is why it's important to make sure that your assessments always stay lower, because if your assessments keep increasing, then that can devalue your property. And that brings me to how much on average do assessments go up? On average, assessments should go up about 1 to 3% a year. 1 to 3%. I actually don't like when somebody tells me like, oh, we haven't raised assessments in 10 years. Because I'll tell you right now, like inflation happens, cost of goods go up, cost of service goes up, things break. That means they're not budgeting correctly. I do think you should raise them on average at a minimum of 1% a year, at least to compensate for what can happen in the future. But the problem is that some buildings, they freak out and they raise them 10% because they didn't budget correctly the year before, and then they raise them another 10% the next year. Now you're up 20%, and now the building's, used to raising the assessments every year, and then they're just adding stuff to the budget because they have all this money that they've already raised it for, and then that starts to devalue the building. So you have to be very cognitive of how you raise your assessments. In all honesty, sometimes it's better to just have a special assessment than increase your assessments. I would rather pay one $10,000 fee than have my assessments go up 30% 2 years in a row, and then when I turn around and sell it, I can't sell it. Because maybe I spent $10,000. You say, well, Matt, if you go up 30% in 4 years, that's not going to make up the $10,000. Yeah, you're right, it's not. But guess what? When I turn around and sell it, I'm probably going to sell it for $25,000 less because the assessments went up more and people don't find it as attractive. And now if I would have just spent that $10,000 up front, I'm still up 15 grand. You have to look at the bigger picture. You have to look at the resaleability. If you have too high of assessments and you keep raising them, the assessments too much, it's going to devalue your unit. Which amenities cost the most money in a building? A pool would cost technically the most if we're looking at just like a physical amenity, but people are the most expensive amenity. This is where people forget about what actually costs money. Like a lot of people are like, well, it's got a gym, it's got a party room, it's got a roof deck. That's why the assessments are higher. It's like, no. I'll tell you right now, like once you have a gym, like the cost to maintain it, year in, year out, if you're not getting new equipment, there's almost nothing, okay? Because you already got somebody there cleaning the stuff, okay? But that person that's cleaning the stuff, they're going to cost you money. You have to hire, I shouldn't say you have to, but you're supposed to hire union people, okay? And they cost money, and they also have benefits, okay? And the people who are there for the longest also get more money, so they get raises. You have an on-site engineer, you got a property manager, you got, 8 door staff, you got a junior manager, you got a janitorial staff. Like, yeah, that's where your money's going. Your money's not going anywhere near towards a fitness center as it is going towards cleaning the building, okay? So I think people are the most expensive, so you ask how many people are in the building, and then you look at amenities, like physical amenities. Our pool is important for resale. In all honesty, I wouldn't say they are. I think some people really like them, and some people don't care. We're in a big city like Chicago, so to be frank, like I don't have a pool in my building, but we just go to East Bank, and there's a pool there for the kids, and I just pay a monthly membership there. And if I don't want the pool, I just have my kids not go there. I think a lot of people kind of feel that way because pools are a lot of maintenance, and it is Chicago, so like you could really only enjoy an outdoor pool like maybe 3 months of the year. And an indoor pool, I don't know, they're not that fun. And to be frank, like I almost never see anybody in indoor pools in a building. So I wouldn't say it's going to be a make or break for the majority of people. I'm sure there's somebody out there saying I'm only looking at high rises downtown Chicago with a pool with a view. Great. I wouldn't say that's 99% of people looking. Is there hours to be able to use all the amenities? Generally speaking, there are some sort of hours. Usually it's like 10 o'clock at night. It's like the latest you could go, and usually it's like 5 a.m. is when you could go in there. But every building is different. What about party rooms? Are there any no-nos for party rooms? I think it's just common sense. You just can't throw like huge ragers, a big wedding or something there without some sort of approval. But also making sure that you are kind of respectful for your neighbors, because there's going to be other people that are going to be there using it. You want to make sure the place is cleaned. What about condo gyms? How big are condo gyms? Condo gyms are nowhere near as big as rental building gyms. So we get a lot of people who come from rental buildings, and like they're used to these huge monster gyms that are like, the size of like, 2 full floors. And then they come to a condo building and it's like, like a small, like studio size place. Generally know that like most condo building gyms are going to be like what I call winter gyms. It's like where you go to if it's pouring rain outside or it's snowed too much. But the general person who owns a condo has a gym membership. It's rarer the gym will completely replace their gym membership. And I'm not saying that there isn't a few condos out there that have gyms that are like good enough to be able to use full time. But I will say that like generally speaking, the average person who's buying in a high rise likes the high-rise lifestyle, which means that they like walkability, they like live in the city, which also means they like going to like some sort of like country club gym situation, okay? I live in a rental now. How does maintenance do everything to your... essentially somebody's asking about like, if you live in a high-rise rental building right now, you can have the property manager, I'm sorry, not the property manager, the building maintenance guy pretty much do all your work. So if like a light bulb breaks, they'll come up and do it, your sink clogs, etc. But that's because you're paying rent. When you own a unit and it's your place, you have to pay to do all that stuff. So, there are, not every building, but some buildings have maintenance staff on site, engineers, okay? And you could pay them a fee. It comes off your assessment to fix that stuff. Or if you're in like a smaller high rise, you can just hire a handyman. But it's not like a bigger building where you're going to, bigger rental building where they just have people on site there. what does an on-site engineer mean? So an on-site engineer means that you have somebody literally on site that's running the buildings day to day. They're looking at everything, a pipe burst, they're on there right on site, etc. You generally will see an on-site manager for buildings that have more than like 100 units. If you have less than 50 units, you generally won't see an on-site manager because it's just too expensive to have them. Those guys make a lot of money. Do all buildings have on-site property managers? It's usually the same thing. I would say about 100 units or more, you're going to have an on-site property manager. Under that, you probably won't. All buildings will have a property management company, meaning that you will hire an outside management company to help consult running the day-to-day building, meaning they get condo docs, they make sure that the building's on budget, they have vendors for you, etc. And if you have so many units, you have them right there in the building. So if you have a problem or an issue, you can just go right downstairs, talk to them. It's kind of like a nice lifestyle. Now, if you're in under 100 unit building, generally speaking, the building won't pay to have it because, again, remember, guys, this is the salary. So again, another salary. And if you don't have enough units to offset that cost, it's going to raise your assessments up. But that's what, a full service, high rise, bigger building will have an on-site property manager. They'll have an on-site engineer. They'll then have like usually 3 junior engineers on staff with them. You're going to have a lot of people in place because it is a big building. It's got to get ran. If it's more of like like maybe 20 to 40 unit, more of a boutique high rise, you're not going to have that. That's going to be kind of the difference. When you're buying a building and getting financing, what does condo approval mean? So when you're buying into a condo building, you got to get condo approval, meaning that the bank has to approve all of the condo documents. This is a big problem that we have with loans. So some buildings don't get condo approval, meaning that they can't get a loan. So let's say like very big issue happened in Surfside, and unfortunately all that bad stuff happened. It came down to being a structural defect in the building. So what the government did is they even harpened the guidelines even more by saying like, hey, we need to make sure that we have some sort of thing in place to make sure something terrible like this doesn't happen again. So they started looking more at structural issues. So if there's any structural issues in a building, or if there's any study done that shows that like a bank won't give you a loan and they'll deny it. They'll also look at budget. So if they don't like what's in the budget, they won't give you a condo approval. So a lot of this stuff, condo approval has to do with budgeting, lawsuits, structural issues, things of that nature can prevent you from getting a loan in a building. Why do I have to spend money to get condo docs? So a lot of buildings, when you go under contract, what happens, you get a contract accepted. Then what you do is you normally, we do it differently. Okay, so we go under contract, we order condo docs immediately. But generally speaking, most people won't order condo docs right away. They'll wait till after the inspection or we're through return to review, because what happens, a lot of people get cold feet or they kill the deal after inspection. And then you have to spend money to get condo docs. So you actually have to spend money because it does cost money for the services of the property manager to hit a couple buttons to release the condo docs. But generally, it's just another way for the building to make money. I mean, buildings are like businesses. So every way they can make a couple bucks, they're going to do it. So one of the things that buildings put in place is that it costs money to get condo docs, which the property management company takes a chunk of that as well. But that's why it costs money to get them. And then the problem is that it takes, up to 2 weeks sometimes to get the condo docs back. Now, they should be on file. And why this takes long, I will never understand. But here's the crazy thing. If you pay an expedited fee, usually anywhere from $100 to $1,000, depending on the price point of the building, it'll come within 24 hours. How does that happen? I don't know. It's crazy. So again, the money part has a lot to do with it. But condo docs can be big killers for big buildings because, if the condo is not well ran, or there's any problems in the rules, or there's anything that you don't like about the building, you're going to find them in the condo docs. And unfortunately, it does take time and money to get these. And this is a big problem. What is a 22.1 disclosure? A 22.1 disclosure is essentially a document that's going to tell you everything there is to know about the building, meaning like, who's behind on assessments, what type of lawsuits they have, what type of special assessments they have coming up, what your actual assessment is. Okay, that's a big one. A lot of people don't know their actual assessment. People are on auto pay, and we have a lot of deals die because the assessment advertised is completely different. Sometimes it's off hundreds upon hundreds of dollars. We've had it off thousands before. How? I don't know. We personally make our sellers give us a screenshot of their most recent assessment. So this doesn't happen to us, but most people don't do this. But those are all things that have to do with condo docs and condo approval. what projects in a building should be done before buying or budgeted for. In all honesty, it depends on the age and etc. Like, use your best judgments, understand, like, if there's any big projects, like any remodeling happening to the hallways, any big projects like any tuck pointing, windows, roof work, or anything like that. Otherwise, it's almost impossible to tell, because unless it's a huge project, they usually won't come out and say it, and it's just kind of like rolling the dice, because you're going to take a calculated risk. You're going to look at all the minutes. You're going to see what they've been talking about the last couple of years. You're going to look at what the budget's been budgeting for. You're going to look at the age of the building, and you're going to say, like, hey, on paper, everything looks good. And then you move forward, and hopefully a special doesn't hit you. I mean, have we bought into buildings and there's been a special like 2 years later? Sure. We've also sold way more units where they bought in a building, there's never been a special. So, unfortunately, like, things are going to happen as a homeowner, and you just try to do your best and hope that additional special assessment doesn't come to you. But you got to do your research on the condo docs. Like, our attorney does a whole condo review for you. So she breaks down all the condo docs and what's going on in the building, etc. The average attorney won't do that because it does take a lot of time. How does new construction work with reserves and high rises? Generally speaking, when you buy into a new construction building, okay, that's a high rise, the builder will put like a decent chunk of money into reserves to kickstart the reserve fund. Meaning, like, it depends on the size. They may give $200,000, they may give $1 million, okay? Now, just so you guys know, it's not a $1 million donation. That's kind of already been buffered into all the costs, okay? Like, nothing in life is free. But they'll generally give money into a fund, and again, it depends on the price point of the building and the size. But that's a question you want to ask, is like, what are the reserve contribution going to be by the developer? And then you normally pay double the assessment when you close. So every unit pays double the assessment. So if your assessment's $1,000, you're going to pay $2,000. And you take $1,000, okay, your $1,000 goes to that, and $1,000 of your assessment goes towards the reserve fund. And if, there's, 1,000 units in the building, like, that's a good chunk of money you're saving. Now, 1,000 units is rare, but you know what I'm saying. How do they come up with pricing for new construction high rises? People will claim a lot of things. Generally speaking, they'll say we want $1 billion sellout, and they'll give whatever agent or development team they have in the sheet of what they want, and give them all the units. But, like, find me a way to get to $1 billion. That's literally how it happens. They're like, I want $1 billion, figure it out. And then the agents and their team will come up with a bunch of numbers. And then there'll be what they call reserve pricing. Reserve pricing means the developer, no matter what, won't sell below X amount for a unit, because if they do, the investor that's backing the project won't give them the money. So, like, yeah, they're like, I get a lot of people like, well, that high rise has been trying to sell for 2 years, and they're asking $1 million. You think we can offer them 700? No, the investor won't take it. They'd rather just sit on it or rent it out until they can get their reserve number. But that's a big thing. What makes up a bad management company? A bad management company is a management company that, doesn't work with you. Okay. And yes, you can fire a management company. This is what I say all the time. I've been in charge of buildings in the past where we had terrible management companies. And I literally just said to him, I said, just remember, you work for me. Okay. Like, part of my money that I contribute to every single month goes towards you. Okay. If you don't want to work with us, if you don't want to be part of this team, and you want to be combative against me, like, I don't need you. Right? Essentially, what people have to realize is that you are the property manager's boss. I'm not saying you got to be a jerk about it, okay? And I'm not saying, like, you got to be cocky about it. But I am saying that there's a lot of property managers out there that take advantage of the people that are giving them the money. And you have to remember, as the people, is that, like, it's your money. So if these people are being rude and combative and not working with you, and I know a lot of people that live in high rises that hate the property managers and say they're terrible, get rid of them. You can fire them. There's nothing stating that you can't fire them. This is an employee of the buildings. And if the building doesn't like the employee, get them out of there. Let's see here. What's the right amount of elevators for a big building? A lot of people worry about buying in high rise because they're like, I don't want to wait a long time, right? So, like, I mean, generally speaking, again, you just have to look at the size of the building, right? If you got, I used to live in a building that was 20 stories, that was 171 units, and there's 2 elevators, okay? And I would say that, like, generally speaking, I wish there was one more elevator. 3 elevators would be fine. But, if you got 2 elevators for, let's say like 100 units, that's technically would be about the minimal I would like to see. And then, like, from every, like, 50 from there, you add an elevator. That's just my thoughts. But, like, obviously, the more elevators you got, the less you have to wait. In older buildings, they split them up. They have low floors. They have elevators that just service low floors, and they got elevators that service high floors. Nobody wants to sit in an elevator, and that's one of the biggest downsides about high rises in general. But in today's day and age, in newer buildings or in older buildings that kind of, like, redo their elevator, they call modernization of the elevators, like it's really not that bad because they move really quick. What about balconies? Can I do whatever I want on a balcony? No, you cannot. Normally, you have to read your rules and regs. Like you can't like just put lights out there if they don't allow them, or Christmas lights, or flags, or whatever it is. You have to remember, guys, like you're essentially in a neighborhood in a big building, and some people may not want the neighborhood to not look as strong from the outside, like, you know, the aesthetic of a building. So if you're looking at a building and every unit has different Christmas lights, different flags, different signs hanging out from there, and then you look at another building and it looks very clean and modern, which one do you think is going to look better? Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong or right about it. I'm just saying, like, on a resale perspective, if you're a consumer that's going to buy a unit and maybe they see something that's offensive to them, that may have brought down the value of your unit indirectly, which is why most buildings have restrictions on what you can put on your balconies. Also, you have to worry about drilling in the ceilings. Most of the high rises are concrete. They're like 13 inches of concrete. And they have like certain material in there that if you drill into them, you can actually like cause a collapse in the building because there is material in there that cannot be touched. It's a suspension system. So if you drill and hit the wrong thing, it could literally ruin the maintenance and the structural integrity of the building. So it's very important you check your rules and regulations before you do anything about that. What about hallways? Can you do whatever you want in hallways? No, you cannot. Usually there's going to be some sort of rules and regulations on that as well. I know we get a lot of people who get mad because they want like, you know, storage lockers out there, or they want to put like REITs or whatever they want. But again, if everybody did it, it wouldn't look that great. It's more of an aesthetic appeal. And maybe you buy into a building where they don't care. Great. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer. Personally, I like more of an aesthetic look, so the place looks cleaner. But you have to look at each building's rules to see what can and can't be done. If a window breaks, who is responsible? Generally speaking, you got to check into the rules. It depends on what the cause of break. But most buildings nowadays have changed the rules to have the owner be responsible for your window, just to try to take off the cost from the associations. I feel like a lot of the older buildings, the windows are the building's responsibility, and I feel like a lot of the newer buildings, the owner's responsible for the windows. If there's a leak, who's responsible? This is another one people ask about. They're nervous about leaks, like a pipe leaking. Usually if it's an interior pipe that only services your unit, you're going to be responsible. If it's an exterior pipe, meaning it's like a plumbing stack that, like we call them risers, that services that entire tier, then that would be a building issue. So think about it this way. Like if it's inside your 4 square boxes and it's only owned by you, you're going to be responsible. If it's a pipe that services other places and is a building pipe, let's call it, it's going to be the building's responsible. That's, again, generally speaking. How often do problems happen with neighbors due to leaks? I mean, it happens. I've personally had it happen to me twice. It's not the greatest experience in the world, but that's kind of part of, you know, communal living. And that's going to be just kind of how it is. And you call your insurance up and you call the person's insurance that it happened to. So if it's your neighbor that calls it upstairs, that caused the leak down to you, you'd call your insurance company and their insurance company, and their insurance company would be responsible. You, of course, are still going to have to pay your write-off, and then you have to deal with all the construction. Is there how secure are high rises from other neighbors? So some people are nervous about maybe breakings and things of that nature. I mean, in all honesty, most buildings, they have everything on record of the people that are in there. Actually, not most. All big high rises have everything on record. So they're generally speaking like very safe because of that nature. There's also like door staff and cameras all over the place. So that is a kind of like a big plus, I'd say, about high rises. Do you always need board approval to be able to buy into buildings? Some buildings require board approval. So what that means is that you have to go in front of a board. You need to have some sort of financial information, letters of reference, and they'll determine whether or not you're worthy enough of buying into the building. Building approval is generally speaking in co-ops. Okay, a co-op means that you own certain shares of the unit. So think of it as a cooperative, as if almost as if you're buying into a corporation. It's like owning a stock. And you generally your taxes and your electric is included in your assessments, which is not normally the case. There's only a few banks that will give loans in there because it's a different type of property. And then you have to have 8 letters of references. So these are references from esteemed colleagues, and you have your Thomas report, and then you present to the board, and the board can determine to not want you in. It is not a very common sale in Chicago. There's not a ton of co-ops, but they do exist. They're very, very big in the East Coast. So generally speaking, my European and East Coast clients love them, and people who are from the Midwest don't like them because they don't understand them. What is a Thomas report? A Thomas report is a report that some buildings require. It's something you have to fill out. It is a confidential information that just says kind of like what your net worth is. Some buildings are nervous about your financial responsibility to be able to buy into the unit, especially if it's a high net worth building, meaning that like HOAs are high, taxes are high. What they don't want to happen is somebody to buy into the building and not be able to afford to live there. So the Thomas report will kind of show the board what the person's net worth is, and the Thomas report back to the building and say like this person is financially responsible or not, or whatever. Thomas reports are pretty rare, but they do exist. How important is a board? A board can make or break a building. If you don't have a well-run building, it's generally speaking because your board itself isn't doing the correct job. It's important that if you do want to get involved, to at the very least go to meetings. I live in a building now where the majority of the residents go to meetings, but when I was on boards at different buildings, I would say like maybe 4 or 5 people go. So the board and the people determine what can happen in a building. But if nobody's going to the meetings, it's just the board that determines. And you get a few bad, people that don't know what they're doing, they can literally ruin the board. Who sets the budget? The board does. The board sets a budget. So if you get a board member who's got a wife that's an interior designer and doesn't like the hallways, wants to remodel them, and nobody's going to meetings, and he's got control of the other board members, guess what? You're having a special assessment to redo the hallways even though you like them. So these are things you have to pay attention to and why it's so important to kind of get involved. Our key fob system is better than regular keys. A lot of people don't like key fobs. I don't know why. It's something that gets brought up all the time. Key fobs are far superior. It's also a good way to code it because they have chips in there. So when you scan it, you know who's went in there at what time. So again, it's another way to honestly, like high rises in general are very safe and secure places because of that. What about garbage? How does garbage work in high rises? Generally speaking, most buildings are going to have garbage chutes on every floor. So you just toss your trash down there. Of course, there's some certain rules what can and can't go down those. And then if you have big boxes, you'd have to break them down, bring them down to wherever the garbage room is, and bring the garbage, the boxes down there. In a very high net worth building, you would just leave your boxes outside your door in the building or in the trash room on the floor, and the building maintenance guys will pick it up. So every building's different, but normally you're going to have a garbage chute and then bring big boxes down. What about package deliveries? It's a hot topic. What happens with those in high rises? It's been a big thing that high rises have been struggling to deal with since COVID, and I'd say now post-COVID they've gotten the hang of it. Most buildings now have designated different package rooms so that when the packages come, they go into a room, and then it's registered. So like if I got a package, I would get an email right away letting me know that I have a package there and who it came from. And then once I pick it up, I get an email saying that my package has been picked up. So if somebody accidentally took my package, I would be notified that my package was missing. But I also already got an email up front. So it's a great way to secure them. And in a big perk of like some like higher end buildings is that they have package people, meaning that they have somebody who actually brings the package. So if you get packages delivered, they bring them up and put them inside your unit. Now that again, you have to fill out forms and certain things like that. But that's another perk of living in a high rise. It's full service. What about remodeling? Can I do the remodeling myself? No, you can't. You have to have. Most buildings require somebody who has a minimum of $1 million insurance policy, because what you don't want is your neighbor upstairs to hire somebody that's not any good, and then they hit a water line, and then everybody's unit in that entire tier floods. So you usually have to have a $1 million insurance policy, and then your plans have to be signed off by the building, which I think is big because you may think it's annoying, but maybe you're a rule follower, but your neighbor may not be a rule follower, and they want to move a whole kitchen, and that can have a big problem. So I do think it's important that you do follow the rules, because this can be a big thing. And I'll tell you, like, there's 1 million contractors in the city. So a lot of people are coming from the suburbs, coming from out of state. They think, wow, remodeling in a big high rise, it's going to be terrible. They got to use the elevators, etc. People have been doing it for hundreds of years, guys. It's not that terrible. As long as you get the right people who know what they're doing and you follow the rules, it's really not that difficult to remodel a place. Let's see here. That's it. That's about all the questions we have regarding high rises. This is everything you could ever possibly want to know about what it's like to buy into or live in a high rise. You know, a lot of people who want that carefree lifestyle, that, you know, they want to be able to like come here, shut the door, and everything's kind of taken care of. It's a great investment to get into. Or if you're an in-town buyer, out-of-state buyer, you just kind of want a second home and not have to worry about it or think about it, and you've been living in that big house forever, and you wanted to, you know, you had to put all that time, energy into it. The upside about high rises is that usually you don't have that. Any other questions you guys have on high rises or anything you ever want to know, please leave them in the comments. We'll get back to you. And thanks for listening to LARICY Live.